Welcome to the store. Don't forget to subscribe, and support me.
The sky was bruised purple, dark clouds hanging low over the plains where the once proud kingdom of Eldra stood. Now, the lands were barren, the cities reduced to ruins, and the people enslaved by fear and cruelty. It had been this way for centuries, ever since the blood pact was sealed between Malgoth, the ancient demon king, and the corrupt human rulers who sought power over their people. The demons thrived, their power growing as humanity splintered into fractured kingdoms, each warring for control of the dwindling resources and lands untouched by demonic influence. Carlos strode through the remains of what had once been his home. Eldra had been a kingdom of strength, of honor, but all that was left now were crumbling buildings and the bones of those who had once walked the streets. His hand clenched tightly around the hilt of his sword, the blade stained with the blood of demons and traitors alike. He had wandered for years, a lone warrior with no purpose beyond survival. But that had changed when he had found the hidden temple, buried deep in the mountains, where the ancient texts had revealed the truth of the blood pact. The pact was not invincible. It could be broken. But only through unity, through a strength that came from the hearts of humanity, not their swords. The message had been clear: only by uniting the divided kingdoms could the demon king be overthrown. But that was a fool's dream. The kingdoms had been at each other's throats for generations, and now, with demons whispering in the ears of corrupt rulers, the chance of peace seemed even more distant. Still, Carlos knew what he had to do. His home, his family, his friends, they had all been taken from him. He had nothing left to lose. If there was even a chance to break the blood pact, to end the reign of Malgoth, he had to try. "You're thinking too much again," a soft voice said from behind him. Carlos turned to see Alia, the priestess who had joined him on his journey. She was young, barely more than a girl, but her eyes held a wisdom that belied her years. She had found him in the ruins of the temple, offering her knowledge of the old faith and her belief in the prophecy that had been whispered through the generations. Alia believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. "Maybe," Carlos replied, his voice rough. "But someone has to think about these things. The kingdoms won't just fall in line because I ask them to. They've been fighting for so long, they've forgotten what it means to stand together." Alia stepped closer, her cloak fluttering in the cold wind. "That's why you're here, Carlos. You have to remind them. You have to show them that there's something worth fighting for." The relics won't unite them," Carlos interrupted, shaking his head. "They're just pieces of metal, symbols of a time long past. These kings and queens, they don't care about symbols. They care about power, about keeping what's theirs." "Maybe," Alia said, her voice steady. "But you're wrong about one thing. The relics aren't just symbols. They're weapons, Carlos. They're the key to forging the blade that can break the blood pact." Carlos looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had known about the relics, ancient artifacts hidden in the depths of each kingdom, guarded by their rulers like treasures from a forgotten age. But he hadn't known they could be used to forge a weapon, one that could destroy Malgoth. "You really think this blade can do it?" he asked. Alia nodded. The texts were clear. The blade of the blood pact can sever the ties between the demon king and the human realm. But it won't be easy. You'll need to gather all the relics, unite the kingdoms, and forge the blade in the sacred fire. Carlos sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "And how am I supposed to do that? The kingdoms are divided. Some of them are in league with the demons. They're not going to listen to me." "Not at first," Alia agreed. "But they will. You're not just a warrior, Carlos. You're a leader. You have the power to unite them. You just have to believe it. Carlos wasn't sure if he believed her, but he knew he had no other choice. If the prophecy was true, if the relics could be forged into a blade that could break the blood pact, then he had to try. "Where do we start?" he asked. Alia smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. "The kingdom of Dragon," she said. "The first relic is there, hidden in the depths of the royal palace. And the king, well, he's not exactly a fan of demons." Carlos nodded. It was as good a place to start as any. He sheathed his sword and turned toward the distant mountains where the kingdom of Dragon lay. "Let's go," he said. The kingdom of Dragon was a fortress, its walls towering over the surrounding lands like the spines of a great beast. The people of Dragon had always been proud, known for their strength in battle and their refusal to bend to outside forces. But even here, in this once mighty kingdom, the signs of the blood pact's influence were evident. The fields were dry, the rivers polluted, and the people thin and hollow-eyed, their faces etched with the same fear that plagued all of humanity under Malgatha's rule. Carlos and Alia approached the gates, their hoods pulled low to avoid attracting attention. The guards were weary but vigilant, and Carlos knew that gaining an audience with the king would not be easy. Fortunately, he had an ally inside the palace, an old friend from his days as a mercenary, a man named Garrick who had once served as the king's personal guard. Garrick met them at a small tavern near the palace walls, his grizzled face breaking into a rare smile when he saw Carlos. "It's been too long, my friend," Garrick said, clapping Carlos on the back. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "Neither did I," Carlos replied, taking a seat at the worn wooden table. "But things have changed. I need to see the king." Garrick's smile faded. "That's not going to be easy. The king, well, let's just say he's not as open to visitors as he used to be." "I'm not just a visitor," Carlos said, his voice low. "I need his help. There's something in the palace, an ancient relic. I have to find it." Garrick raised an eyebrow. "A relic? You're chasing old stories now." Carlos leaned forward, his eyes intense. "This isn't a story, Garrick. It's real. If I don't find that relic, and the others like it, we're all doomed." "The blood pact, I've heard the stories," Garrick interrupted, his expression darkening. "But stories won't stop Malgath. The king has already lost too much. He's not going to risk what little he has left on some wild quest." Carlos met his friend's gaze, unflinching. "Then I'll make him listen." Garrick sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You always were the stubborn one." "Fine. I'll get you in to see him. But don't expect a warm welcome." The throne room of King Dragon was a cold, echoing chamber, its once grand decorations tarnished by years of neglect. The king sat on a high-backed throne, his face lined with age and weariness. He was a large man, his body still strong despite the years, but his eyes were filled with the same hollow despair that Carlos had seen in the faces of so many. "Who are you to demand an audience with me?" the king asked, his voice a deep rumble. Carlos stepped forward, pulling back his hood. "My name is Carlos. I'm here to save your kingdom." The king snorted, leaning back in his throne. "Save my kingdom? You're a fool if you think anyone can save this land now. The demons have already taken everything. The blood pact cannot be broken." "You're wrong," Carlos said, his voice firm. "The pact can be broken. But I need your help to do it. There's a relic hidden in this palace, one of the keys to forging a blade that can destroy the pact. The king's eyes narrowed. A blade? You think some old weapon will stop Malgoth? It's not just any weapon, Alia said, stepping forward. The blade of the Blood Pact is the only thing that can sever the ties between the Demon King and this world. But we need the relic to forge it. The king stared at them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed and stood from his throne. If what you say is true, then you have my support. But I warn you, if you fail, my people will suffer even more than they already have. We won't fail, Carlos promised. Carlos nodded to the king, his resolve growing stronger with the ruler's cautious support. Time was of the essence, and failure was not an option. Without another word, the king beckoned one of his guards forward, who guided them deep into the palace's ancient chambers. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls lined with forgotten relics and emblems of battles long past. Alia kept close, her eyes scanning the dimly lit hallways, as if she could sense the relic they sought. Carlos remained silent, focused on the task ahead. He could feel the weight of destiny pressing on him. This was the first step, and he couldn't afford to stumble now. At the end of the corridor, the guard led them to a large stone door, etched with markings in a language long forgotten. Alia stepped forward, her fingers tracing the symbols. "It's here," she whispered. "The relic is behind this door." Carlos took a deep breath, stepping forward as the guard pulled a hidden lever. The heavy door groaned open, revealing a small chamber beyond. In the center of the room, resting on a stone pedestal, was a shimmering, curved dagger, its blade gleaming with an unnatural light. The relic. Alia hesitated, her eyes widening as she stared at the dagger. "It's more powerful than I thought," she murmured. "This is only one part of the weapon, but its energy, it's ancient, Carlos." Carlos approached the pedestal, his hand outstretched. As his fingers closed around the hilt, a surge of energy coursed through him, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to shake the very foundation of the palace. His mind filled with visions of battles past, of blood spilled in the name of the Blood Pact, of the demons that had torn his world apart. The weight of the relic in his hand was more than just physical. It was the key to a new future, but it was also a reminder of the immense burden he now carried. "We need to go," Alia said, her voice tense. "The demon forces will sense the disturbance. They won't be far behind." Carlos nodded, tightening his grip on the dagger as they turned back toward the palace entrance. As they ascended the stairs, the cold air seemed to grow sharper, more oppressive. Shadows flickered in the corners of his vision, and he knew Alia was right. The demons wouldn't let them leave without a fight. As they reached the surface, the distant sound of horns echoed through the palace walls. Carlos cursed under his breath. The demons had already arrived outside the palace gates, the night sky had turned an ominous shade of red, and the streets were filled with chaos. People screamed and fled as dark figures moved through the smoke-filled air, their glowing eyes locked on the palace. Demons, dozens of them, their twisted forms marching toward the gates. "We'll never make it out without a fight," Carlos growled, drawing his sword. Alia's eyes flashed with determination. "We don't have to. I can summon a barrier to buy us time." Carlos glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "Can you hold them off long enough?" "I have to," she replied, already stepping forward. She raised her hands, chanting in the old tongue. A shimmering wall of light appeared before the palace gates, halting the demons' advance. They screeched in frustration, clawing at the barrier, but for the moment, they were trapped on the other side. Carlos wasted no time. "We need to get to the next kingdom," he said. "Dragon is only the first step." They fled through the narrow streets, weaving through the shadows as the chaos spread around them. Carlos could feel the weight of the relic in his pack, its power thrumming against his back as they ran. Behind them, the barrier shuddered under the weight of the demon assault, but it held long enough for them to disappear into the night. The journey to the next kingdom was fraught with danger. The roads were lined with the remnants of villages destroyed by demonic forces, their people scattered or enslaved. Carlos and Alia kept to the forests, avoiding the main roads where patrols of demons hunted for survivors. Every night, they took turns keeping watch, knowing that at any moment, they could be discovered. Days turned into weeks as they traveled deeper into enemy territory, the weight of their mission growing heavier with each passing moment. Carlos could feel the pressure mounting. They had only retrieved one relic, but there were still several more to find, and each kingdom they visited would be harder to convince than the last. Finally, they reached the borders of the Kingdom of Thorn, a land known for its fierce independence and isolationism. The ruler, Queen Adira, had kept her people largely untouched by the chaos that had consumed the rest of the world. Her kingdom sat high in the mountains, protected by treacherous terrain and the unyielding will of its people. Carlos knew this would be their greatest challenge yet. The queen had little interest in the affairs of the other kingdoms, and convincing her to join their cause would be no easy task. As they approached the mountain pass that led to the capital, they were met by a group of Thorn's elite guards, their faces obscured by helmets shaped like wolves' heads. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "State your business." Carlos held his hands up, showing that he meant no harm. "We need an audience with the queen. It's a matter of life and death." The guard's eyes narrowed. "Queen Adira doesn't meet with outsiders." "She will meet with us," Alia said, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Tell her that we carry the first relic of the blood pact. She'll understand." The guard hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Wait here." As the guards disappeared up the mountain path, Carlos turned to Alia. "You're sure she'll listen?" Alia shrugged. "We don't have any other choice." They waited in silence for what felt like hours, the cold mountain air biting at their skin. Finally, the guards returned. "The queen will see you," the leader said, motioning for them to follow. The capital of Thorn was nestled high in the mountains, surrounded by towering peaks that seemed to scrape the sky. The city was a fortress, its walls carved from the mountains themselves, and its people moved with the quiet confidence of those who had never known fear. As they entered the queen's palace, Carlos couldn't help but feel the weight of history pressing down on him. This place had stood for centuries, untouched by the wars that had ravaged the rest of the world. The walls were lined with tapestries depicting the victories of Thorn's armies, and the floors were polished to a gleam. Queen Adira sat on a throne made of black stone, her posture regal and unyielding. She was a striking figure, her silver hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes sharp and calculating. Carlos could see immediately that this was not a woman to be trifled with. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice smooth but commanding. "But I do not grant audiences lightly. Why should I waste my time with you?" Carlos stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've come to ask for your help. The blood pact is destroying our world, and we have a way to break it. But we need the relic that's hidden here in your kingdom." Adira's eyes flickered with interest, but she didn't show it. "And what makes you think I care about the fate of your world? Thorn has stood strong for centuries. We don't need your help." Carlos clenched his fists, but Alia stepped in before he could speak. "Your people may be safe now," she said. "But for how long? Malgatha's influence is spreading, and no kingdom is truly immune. Eventually, even Thorn will fall. You have the power to help stop him before that happens. Adira studied them for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. You speak boldly for outsiders, she said. But bold words are not enough. If you want my support, you'll have to prove yourselves. What do you want us to do? Carlos asked. Adira's lips curled into a smile. There is a trial. A test of strength and loyalty. If you pass it, I will consider aiding you in your quest. Carlos nodded. We'll do it.